once again on this Halloween edition of Nuance. I am Mike Scala, and we'll be talking about the president's executive order on AI shortly. Of course, I'm joined, as always, by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist and chair of BLM Tokyo. Live from Tokyo this time. What's going on, Jay?
Yes, live from Tokyo this time. Came in to do a guest lecture at Temple University, Japan. And it's funny when you just said, what you call it? What did you just say? Something that triggered it for me. Oh, Halloween.
Halloween.
Halloween was yesterday for me. So
That's right. That's right. It's always like a glimpse into the future when we're talking to Jay.
yeah. So it was, yeah. What a lot of people I don't think realize is that in the last couple of years, even though Halloween is not Japanese culture or part of culture in Japan, in the last couple of years, there's been a party every year on Halloween night in Shibuya, and it has grown to be the biggest Halloween street party in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And this year, the government wanted to stop that, and so the busiest intersection, the busiest place in the planet, they went out and put all these barriers and made this crazy maze to try to funnel the way people move, to keep people moving. So there was no street party in Shibuya this year. And it was just ridiculous.
So. It was ridiculous that they shut it down?
Well, I can understand thinking why they want to shut it down, because probably after what happened last year in Korea, where they had the mass Halloween party and all those people got killed due to human stampedes. But it was never officially in a party. It was just like Halloween came and then just everyone came to Shibuya in costumes and drinking and all this in the streets, and it was kind of disruptive. But the way that they did it is very, as my cousin's husband put it, because we went out there, it was very over-engineered and unnecessary. So they blocked off certain parts that would normally have human traffic and alleviate crowds to go through. They blocked those off, set up stands for the press to set up cameras to watch people be shuttled around through this place to avoid the crowds, to avoid having the party. It's like, why would you block off place for observation for this? That makes no sense, first of all. And then they set up this elaborate maze type of thing to make sure traffic only flowed a specific way. But what that did was it created more bottlenecks of people concentrated in certain areas because they had no places to walk to.
Right.
And so it just made more of an issue than it needed to be, So like this place is Shibuya Scramble, which is the intersection right outside of the station that is the busiest intersection in the world. And the crosswalks come from all directions. I mean, like all different directions. And it's just a free-for-all normally. So you just, once the light changes, everyone goes whatever direction. Well, this way they tried to actually set up, they had police out there holding ropes to make sure people were walking through corridors along specific routes in the crosswalk. And it's like, if it was just left open and you just had police standing there just making sure people kept it moving, then you would have accomplished the same thing without creating this big bottleneck.
See, that reminds me of the discussion we had last week about whether the Ebony Alert was narrowly tailored to achieve that compelling governmental interest, right? We were discussing, we'll get into it when we talk about our poll results, but we were discussing how it seemed like there was a valid interest there, but maybe they were doing too much to achieve it, and it might have had a counterproductive effect. But we'll get into that. I want to talk about your lecture as well, but first I want to introduce Sheba Abraham joining us again. Thank you, Sheba. Of course, you represent the League of Women Voters. What's going on with you, Sheba?
Everything. I've been doing quite a bit, I should say. I've been going to debates because that's what our focus is here now, because you have quite a few candidates running for office.
By the way, Election Day is next Tuesday. Don't forget to vote.
Yes, the 7th, it is. And as a matter of fact, over the weekend, I was at a block party for the mayor and Yvonne Flowers, who is the first Black woman running for mayor of Poughkeepsie. Congressman Ryan did come to the event, which was very nice. to see him.
Mhm.
And we're just waiting to see what happens. We're all excited, and we're hoping that she will win. But Jay, I'm sorry to hear you had so much trouble with Halloween. They had I think if they had a parade, it would make it so much easier, as they had a parade in Beacon. I
Yeah,
don't know if you heard of Beacon, New York. Well,
of
you know where
course.
Beacon is, Mike. So
Yeah,
they had a parade, Halloween parade, and you know, a lot of little children. You had quite a few children, but at least it was controlled and everyone enjoyed themselves with no incidents
right.
happening.
There was a parade here in Howard Beach. Also, I got to shout out Brina, who was a guest on Nuance before. She was Grand Marshal at the parade this year. So it's a
Mhm.
nice tradition.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
have quite a few parades here in and Poughkeepsie too. They're having parades just about all around. I would say not all around, but in some of the towns. And where they don't have parades, they have like treat and trunks where you drive your car and they open the trunk and you get treats that way.
Right. Yeah, trunk or treat.
Yeah, yeah, trunk or treat. Yeah.
So I want to talk about a couple of things before we get into our main topic. So we should keep it somewhat brief because we have a lot to get into. But Jay, you mentioned your lecture, so I definitely want to hear, and I think the people would like to hear how that went. And Sheba, I know you had an issue with a debate where one of the candidates didn't show up, right? So I want to discuss both of those things. So Jay, why don't you tell us a little bit about the lecture that you did?
Well, the lecture went really good. I tried to we talked about BLM, giving just some foundational information, because this class in the school has a lot of international students. So I mean, first of all, it's in Japan, so it's going to be Japanese students in there, but it is an American university, so you have Americans that come out, but then also people from different countries. So not everyone's going to have the same kind of understanding of BLM or the movement, some of the actions that have taken place over the years. So talk about that. And actually, for the past couple of years, I go in about once a semester and do this kind of lecture at various classes here at Temple University. And so we covered that, and then the teacher had requested a couple of specifics that some students were having trouble getting a grasp on, and some of those were defund the police. They were getting in trouble with Asian hate issues, misconceptions about where the main perpetrators were Black people against Asians, and they were having misconceptions about the peaceful nature of the protests that were happening during that time, that the uprising was happening, when George Floyd incident.
Right. So is that a reflection of the media skewing people's perceptions?
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty common and known that there is a profound anti-Blackness bias in media. When there is something that happens, I mean, news has to choose what they're going to report on, right? They can't report everything, so they have to choose, and more often than not, if it's a Black person perpetrating something, that's the news that they're going to show versus someone else. For example, when the anti-Asian hate crime violence that arose in that year, there was a study that came out by a professor at University of Maryland, and her findings came up with two other studies, one from University of Michigan, and they used statistics, not only the new statistics, but statistics going back to 1992, and found that the anti-Asian hate violence that came out, 75% were perpetrated by white men.
Mm.
However, the media and the viral videos that were going on were all showing incidents of black people versus Asian people. And
Right.
so that perception is what gets broadcast out.
Mhm.
I even had experience of that too when I was interviewed for a national media agency out here a couple years back. The comment section, some of the Japanese comments in there were referring to, oh yeah, well, he's talking about treating people as people and this and that. What about the Black people attacking Asians in the States? It's like, even that misinformation goes out worldwide because of how
Yeah.
news is disseminated.
I wonder if that affirmative action case played into that as well, because that seemed to pit Black people against Asians to a certain degree.
Yeah, it's well, I don't know if it how it reached out here, and I didn't get to touch on that because but and actually, you know what, I meant to speak on that last night because I had dinner with a Japanese professor of African American history. He's a professor at one of the largest universities here, and he got his degree from Harvard. And so there's a connection there, being Japanese, going to Harvard, and being in that environment firsthand. So I didn't get a chance to get his take on any of that. But yeah, that was a case where this guy Blum was basically put Asians against blacks and other minorities in school admission, saying, hey, they're taking your spot, which we know absolutely was not true. But he had exhausted other means, and this was another strategy, and he won with it.
It reminds me of that Nas line. Did you hear King's Disease 2, where he's got that line? He says, people battered down, Asian hate passed around, Tiger happy, both his parents' lives matter now.
No, I don't know.
Tiger Woods, right? The black side and the Asian side together.
Right.
Right. Yeah. But Tim, you are right, Jay. You're right about what you're saying about when it came to Black people and Asian hate, because there were a group of young Asian women, and they had come together to stop that propaganda. And they were saying then, they said, don't believe it, because Black people are not harassing Asians like they're trying to portray that they are.
Right.
And that was an issue with them. They were just saying, stop saying that, because all what you're saying is untrue.
Right. And I remember at the time talking to Granddaddy IU. This is obviously before he passed, when that was really in the news, and he just was like, man, do you see the stuff in the news? They're talking about that there's this big issue between blacks and Asians out here in New York. It's like, it's just not even happening. Like, what the heck? And and I was like, yeah, that's the videos that are coming out, right? Remember the one at the train station, the one in, I think it was Brooklyn. There was an incident, and not to saying that nothing happened, because obviously 25% was someone other than white men, but the majority of the cases, and this showed historical data going back to 92 that this was the case. And so
yeah, a lot of engineering going on, it seems, to further divide people, and then there are certain people who come in and capitalize on that division, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
That actually reminds me of the book. I got to bring it up now because I got this book. I ordered it. I finally got a copy of it. Are Italians White? How Race is Made in America, and talks about the history of Italian American immigrants in the U.S. And I am mentioned in here. This is why the book got on my radar in the first place. They had mentioned my name, but now that I've actually got the book in my hands, I'm going through it and I'm seeing the context in which I'm mentioned. And it is really interesting because it talks about how when the Italians first came to the US, they were oppressed, right? They were mistreated. They were even called the N-word, all these different names. And as time went on, that started to change. And then you get into the 80s and there were some high profile racially charged killings, and you have some Italians leaning into their whiteness and getting kind of ugly when that was happening. But then it mentions me as an example, not just me, other Italian American hip hop artists, and I'm one of the ones mentioned. They say that not all Italian Americans leaned into their whiteness essentially at this time. And it mentions how some identified with hip hop culture. And it basically portrays me as a spiritual successor of sorts of the original immigrants who came in and were mistreated, right? I identify more with the struggle. Hip hop is about the struggle, as opposed to those who were getting involved in some of that nastiness in the 80s, and some of which still continues today. So I think it's a really interesting discussion in here about the Italian experience, but more broadly, race in America. And different groups come in and get treated, and sometimes they try to identify with the oppressors because they no longer want to be oppressed. And it's really crazy how it all plays out.
And you touched on that, and that happened with a lot of groups that came in because I guess you would call it that white Anglo-Saxon Protestant group kind of thumbed their nose at a lot of different groups coming in, even if it were similar skin color, right? Italians coming in Russians come in, Irish. There used to be
Yeah,
signs that would say like no Irish, no dogs, types of things,
that's
right?
in here. They talk about, and it's, mostly the Anglos who were already in the US
Right,
saying things like, the white man is superior, but excluded from this are Italians, Jews,
right,
Slavs, and Irish. And they start listing people who don't count as white in their view.
right. And then over time, the because of the skin tone being the same, those groups were able to assimilate into
Mm-hmm.
whiteness as was seen by the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And I mean that those groups still exist. That WASP group still has that, but they're more of a concentrated area. Northern was a New England type of states, but they were able to assimilate into this idea of whiteness and become white, and transcend that because, like you said, people come in and they don't want to be discriminated against or oppressed, and they look at the playing field and they say, okay, those people are down there, those people are up there. I'm going to adopt more of their mindset and bring me closer to that so that I'm not being stepped on like them. And we saw that across the board. And it happened even with, I mean, that's kind of where you get the Asian model minority myth, even though, they don't have the same, they're visibly different than the white population, but they adopted some of those things, but also adopted a position of kind of sticking to themselves. And so they kind of came in a non-threatening, but they did adopt some of those same prejudices and stereotypes mentally of people, Black people
Yeah.
and whatnot.
Right. And it
Right.
seems as new groups start coming in,
Yeah,
it gives room for the people who are here to assimilate and identify as white or be more embraced as white
right,
by those who were here prior, because now they got a new group to hate on. It's like a shiny new toy that they can all hate.
right. Yeah,
But Mike, I do know that that happened with the Sicilians,
Mm-hmm.
because I met a young lady, and I met a woman, as a matter of fact, who was Italian, and she often spoke about her husband, family from Sicily, Sicilians off the coast. Is it? I
Right.
think it's off the coast of Italy. It's part of it.
Yes,
It's
it's
a
an
part of
island,
Italy.
right? The southern tip
Right.
of Italy is also very
Right.
close to Africa.
Right.
right,
And she was saying the difficulty that they had because they were considered lower than the Italians that were of a lighter color.
Right. Also
And
darker skinned, and yep,
right,
there's that
she did.
classism and colorism, right? Even amongst cultures.
Yeah. And
right,
I met
right.
a young lady, yeah, I met a young lady who was my complexion, and she was actually from Italy. And she was saying how her family, the difficulty her family had, but they are all Italians.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it
I think
does exist.
that would have come around the time that the Moors had held on to parts of Italy for an extended period of time, which would have been, a lot of Black folks from Africa and
Right.
Muslims from Africa at
Yeah,
that time, and there would have been some mixing there.
from Northern Africa. And you know what? I haven't taken a DNA test yet. I plan to because I know that I am part Sicilian and part Nobledan, but I bet you I'll find some African blood. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see that because I come from
Right,
Mhm.
not myself personally, but my family comes from southern Italy and Sicily, and
right,
I'm sure that's there. So when this
yeah,
book says that I'm an example of Italians maybe not leaning into whiteness, maybe identifying more culturally as Black. I mean, it could be a thing as far as my bloodline as well.
right, right. And it also that as far as hip hop culture, it's embraced those in that weren't in that upper crust, so to speak. You know what I mean? And so that's you can see why some would identify with that, right? Some that were maybe uh, poor, or some that were in urban areas. That was the culture that was speaking to fairness, or speaking to the youth in that time. And so a lot of people, regardless of skin tone, gravitated towards hip hop because there was
Right.
that acceptance there too.
Absolutely. And it's just interesting how that is a piece of the American story as it relates to race and class and just people oppressed, people feeling oppressed. I mean, the socioeconomic thing, it's a racial
Right,
thing, it's all of the above.
right,
And it's kind of interesting to see it put in that perspective, right? Because I just came up falling in love with hip hop, getting involved in the culture, And now they talk about me in this book as almost someone who is more like the original Italian immigrants who came in, who were struggling and who were suffering, right, than the ones who came after that, who tried to assimilate, and some maybe took it too far and leaned into some of the ugly sides of American life. So to see that perspective, I think, was quite fascinating. I'm still going through the book, and it's a very interesting story.
Awesome. All right, sounds like an interesting book, actually.
Yeah. So Sheba, we wanted to talk about the debate that you were involved in, a planned debate. You said the Republican candidate just didn't show up.
Right, candidates. It was more than one.
Okay.
Because you have the family court, the clerk for the Dutchess County clerk, and other offices that are, I think it's like about maybe four, I think about five offices that are running, that's up for election. And they had everything planned. The debate was planned. They had contacted the League of Women Voters to come in and assist. Then I get a message saying that it wasn't going to happen because the the candidates decided that they weren't going to come.
Mm.
And I was like, wow.
So they canceled. They had originally said they would be there and pulled out.
Yeah, and from what I understand was someone that was living in the town where it was going to take place said they knew the Republicans were not going to show up to debate, and it has put a bad taste in some of their constituents. I would say some of the people that go to debates that have questions. It has put a bad taste in, I would say, in some mouths, because it seems like, are they like they're being a bit, quote, arrogant?
Well, yeah, I would like to see the electoral history of that particular area. I want to see if Republicans dominate and they feel like, why debate? They're going to win anyway, or if there's another reason why this is happening, because you do sometimes see that, and I think it is a sign of arrogance, but you will sometimes see people skipping debates or skipping forums or any kind of candidate nights when they think they have it in a bag, or when the election is already decided and it's not going to make a difference. Sometimes you'll see the underdog wanting to debate. How come my opponent won't debate me? Because they're trying to gain some kind of momentum, whereas the person who thinks that they've got it already locked up thinks, why bother?
Right, but then you don't know what policies they stand for. What is the agenda? If you don't hear that,
I think,
right,
absolutely. And you should even look at it as an extension of your job. If you're running for office and you think that you're going to win handily, maybe you will because of how that district is made up. Your job will be to represent the people. So it's getting off, I think, on the wrong foot to say, you know what, I've got it in the bag. I'm not going to show up to the debate. Because if you're not going to show up to the debate, are you going to show up when you're in office? Are you going to show up to the town hall meeting? Are you going to show up, right? Are you going to be visible, be transparent, be accountable to the public? Or are you going to think because the electorate is what it is, you can just put your feet up and get paid to do nothing, essentially? That's the message that I think it sends voters.
Right, because I know when I went to the one in Poughkeepsie, all the candidates that they asked to come came. But when we tried to have one in another town in the county, they did not show up. So I just wonder what's happening and why did they make that decision?
Right. And this isn't, by the way, just a partisan thing. I've seen this often in New York City in Democratic primaries, even. If you had a candidate who, let's say they're the incumbent and they've got all the money, all the support, everything is behind them. And then you've got candidates who are like the little engine that could, right? They've got no money, no support, but they're very grassroots and they're trying to make a name for themselves. Maybe they don't even think they're going to win this time, but they're just trying to get themselves out there and start up a little political thing. A lot of times the incumbent or the favorite will just refuse to show up because they don't even want to give a platform to the smaller candidate, right? They don't even want to legitimize them by debating them, being seen on that stage with them. And so they say, I've got this locked up anyway. I'm not even going to give them any kind of shine.
But do you think that's unfair?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that deprives the voters of a chance, all right? Even if that incumbent, whoever is going to win, You want to be able to ask them questions, talk to them, see where they stand, hold them accountable. They're there to serve the public, right? And so to me, that's a failure of public service. You're not serving the public by doing that.
Yeah, and it would raise questions in my mind about the candidate, like you mentioned earlier, like, okay, so is this indicative of how they're going to lead when they're, if they're in office?
Right.
Yeah.
So that could be the poll question of the week. We can ask the extent to which this affects people, because we know election day is coming up and early voting already started here. So let's put it out there. The question of the week is, when a candidate skips a debate, do they risk losing your vote?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Absolutely.
Well,
and then you got to also be fair too, that they can't go to every debate they're invited to. So it has to be, I guess, to some degree, a quote unquote legitimate debate.
Yeah.
I mean, but there aren't that many debates. I mean, I didn't skip out on any debates. If I were invited to 500 of them, yeah, then maybe. But the local newspaper, The Wave, did one, and there was one for one of the websites, and there was just a couple. And so I was happy to do them. And you know what? A lot of prep went into it. I think I mentioned that before. It's not just showing up to the debate. I took it seriously. I really did my studying, and I read up on all the issues. Not that I didn't know, because I was already campaigning, so I was already involved in the issues, but you want to be extra prepared for a debate, and you want to be prepared for whatever can come up. And so you want to have your stats ready, your facts and figures, and you want to be good to go. And so I took that seriously. The debate comes and goes in an hour, 2 hours, but you could be prepping for it for 10 hours, 15 hours.
Yeah. Right? It's always interesting to me, especially coming from the hip hop background, that the similarities between debates and battle rap.
Oh yeah. I even said that at my debate in 2017 for the general election, because they were trying to make issue of the fact that I was involved in hip hop at the time, and kind of backfired on them. And so in my opening statement, I said, I'm not sure if this is going to be a debate or a rap battle. And I think I even rhymed some bars that were relevant to the debate, just to kind of put that out there and show I'm not ashamed. You're not going to try to get me with this. Let's go. I'm going to use this. And that's a very hip hop thing to do also, right? Try to take something and flip it on them and say, I'm going to make it an asset. It's not a liability. I'm going to use it to my benefit.
Right. Yeah. So
now my article in the local paper is called Scala's Rap,
Yeah. And we talked about that before, because even from the very first campaign, we had the wherewithal to understand that candidates would come from, or media would come for, that background. And
because it's different. And because of the racial implications involved.
And say what?
And because of the racial implications involved, like we were
racial implications, the image of hip hop, and the stereotyping of certain things. Yeah, there were going to be things they were coming for, and then they were going to go through lyrics. Like some people did try to comb through lyrics and misrepresented lyrics.
Right, lyrics that weren't even mine in some cases.
Yeah, right. Do you fools listen to music, or do you just skim through it?
It's clearly the latter. I want to shout out everyone checking in. We've got Kyrul, Deborah, Joe Moore. I see Lixa in the chat. I see James. What's going on, guys?
Yeah, we're being I guess they're kind of sad in the chat that we're not sitting here in costumes.
I've got my in the background. That's my Halloween decoration.
I'm dressed. I told him I'm dressed as an expat, an American expat.
I'm dressed as an Italian-American hip-hop artist who apparently casts doubt on whether Italians are white. So
what's your costume, Shiva?
My costume is me. I'm dressed as me.
Someone said at least Shiva has orange on.
Yes.
So it looks like you made more of an effort than we did.
Yeah.
Pumpkin is orange. Pumpkin doesn't count. Come on.
Yeah. So
speaking
I've
of,
got my mask. I can put my mask on and be like an assassin or something.
Okay, then people are going to ask, how come you wearing the mask? Someone did that once when they came on here with the mask. I got 5 or 6 messages from people saying, why is she in a mask? And I really think they wanted me to say that she wore the mask because she was afraid she was going to get COVID from us through Zoom, and then that she
Right.
could mock me for being such an idiot. You're a COVID paranoid person, that kind of thing. And no, she happened to wear it because she was in the video game industry or something like that, and just didn't want her identity shown on the stream to do with COVID. But that's how things get, right? Everything is so politicized now. You see the mask, it's oh my God, you're COVID this, COVID. It's like, all right, guys, chill out. Sometimes people want to put a mask on.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's still happening. I just saw it yesterday. There was a tweet. Someone it was a picture of someone was wearing a mask, and they're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe they're still doing this. Why are they still doing this? What's wrong with these people?"
Yeah,
it's like, why does it matter to you? Like, what if someone asked you, "Why are you still wearing a baseball cap?" Like, what? Shut up.
Right. There could be immunocompromised. There could be any number of reasons.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and on my story right now, I've got a post because I have been uploading videos to the Mike Scala YouTube channel slowly. Got so much content, so about once a week I'm trying to put a new video up, and then I'll put it usually on my stories on social media so people can go check it out. So you'll see people in masks. It's because it was during COVID, right? They're still doing it now, but sometimes people will see that and ask, "How come people are still wearing a mask?" Like they get very sensitive about that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. People here, like I said,
you have some people suffering with long COVID too.
Right.
Because I did see that, and so that's probably why they're wearing the mask as well.
Yeah. And look, I side eye anyone coughing in public. I'm side eyeing them. Like, listen, get away from me.
Just do whatever makes you feel comfortable. You know,
people out here are not stressing it. I've said it before. People out here didn't stress the mask. They still don't. It was a normal part of society even before COVID. So it's it's nothing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we just put the poll out there about the debates. So why don't we go over our poll results from last week, and then we will discuss the AI executive order.
Yes. So our poll last week was in regards to California's new Ebony Alert. Governor Newsom had signed the Ebony Alert system into law. It's supposed to go into effect on January 1st, and this was attempting to address the disparity in searching between missing Black individuals that the Amber Alert seems to fail. And so the question we put out was, do you believe there should be a separate missing persons alert specifically for Black youth, as was done in California? And so our poll results were interesting. There was 26% that said yes, 55% that said no, and then 18% that said I'm not sure. Yeah.
No, it's always encouraging when people say I'm not sure, because everyone is a know-it-all now and they think they know everything. And especially on social media, you see that, right? People just fighting, and always the extreme. It's gotta be this, gotta be that. So when people say, you know what, I really don't know, to me, that's a positive sign. It shows that people actually want to think things through and gain more information, and that's a good thing.
Right. And some of the comments, well, the YouTube comments that we got were just all blanket no. But the ones on the daily polls did go in and ask a few more questions to actually look for the nuance in the situation, which was again, like you said, encouraging. And in looking through that and some of that discourse, I did also look into more of the law than we might have understood prior. And I can see a little bit more why now it might be necessary to have this separate alert. Because, for example, like the Amber Alert one, we know that it's being disproportionately triggered to look for missing white children, right? But also, you have to qualify. You have to be under 17 years of age. Is one instance. Whereas the Ebony Alert, they extended the age to 25, and also included Black women, who are one of the most vulnerable in regards to being sexually trafficked or abducted.
Okay, but we have to draw the distinction between the Amber Alert, which is done at the federal level, and the Ebony Alert in California, which is at the state level. And so if California is enacting its own system, it doesn't need to restrict it just to Black youth. If they wanted to go to 25, they can have anyone under 25.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
But it was to address the fact that largely, as far as missing, even though the Black population is a smaller percentage of the population, they do make up about 40% of the missing children cases. And then as far as the sex trafficking, Black women and Black girls are among the most vulnerable in that regard for a variety of reasons. And so this was an attempt to um, rectify that disparity here, to make sure that there are some resources available in these cases. So,
Mhm.
But again, see, my thing is this: just because they represent the highest share of those cases, why does the alert only apply to that segment of the population? Why wouldn't you want to create an alert that would cover everyone, even if people aren't in the highest percentage of cases? I mean, they're still a missing person, right?
right, no, that's absolutely true. But if we're looking at the way that the alerts are being applied in other cases where it's being disproportionately applied towards white missing people or youth, then if you did the same thing with an ebony alert but didn't make it specific, then you can easily assume that the disproportional triggering would happen there as well.
The danger, right? That is
Yeah.
true. But
The
Mhm.
problem becomes now if you've got too many alerts from different sources, people will become desensitized to them as
right,
well.
the thing is also though, Jay, just because you're creating a new classification doesn't mean
Right.
that the issue of racism is solved, right? And so you're saying that you had this Amber Alert and these other systems, and just the way that they were pursued, they were supposed to be for everyone, but they were pursued more to help missing white people. All right, so now you're going to create another classification called the Ebony Alert. That doesn't mean that authorities are suddenly going to lose their racism and
Right.
pursue that the way they're supposed to be. They can still slack off the Ebony Alerts and go for the other ones more, right?
Absolutely. And it's still largely up to the discretion of law enforcement on when to trigger these alerts,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So they still have to make that call to be like, okay, we're going to issue an ebony alert in this case.
Mhm.
It does free them up to be able to issue an alert in a wider variety of cases, whereas Amber Alert is kind of pretty specific in that case. Like that has to be actual evidence of abduction, right?
Mm.
That becomes a very strict case because if someone goes missing and you don't know if they were abducted or not, maybe it's, whatever, this opens it up to maybe they're vulnerable because of their age, maybe they're vulnerable because of potential bodily harm or whatnot. So it gives a little bit more leeway to
Yeah.
issue
Well,
something.
I'm biased, obviously, because I like what we did in New York for the missing adults, where, and of course, no system is going to be perfect. People can still misuse it and what have you, but
Right.
it requires police reports when certain criteria are met, one of
Right.
which is kind of a catch-all provision of reasonable concern for their safety. And the reason why we put these specific provisions in was because it mirrored the federal database that already existed for missing persons.
Mhm.
That was why the bill was vetoed prior to my arrival in Albany, because the governor at the time was Governor Cuomo. He said that the state bill was incompatible with the federal database because it required entries into the database even when there was no corresponding field in that database. So you'd be forcing officers to try to put things into a database that wouldn't fit, essentially. And so I said, all right, this is a real easy fix. Let's basically look at what the factors are in that database, what allows entries, and let's just put those same factors in the state law, because one of them was reasonable concern for their safety. There are others too, like they're missing after a catastrophe, natural disaster,
Mhm.
all those kinds of things, but concern for their safety, right? And of course, that has a little bit of subjectivity in it. So it's not a
Right.
perfect foolproof
What-
system, but
Well,
it
is
at
that
least takes the option away. And it shows that now the police have to file reports on everyone who's missing when there's that concern. And
Right.
again,
so?
people
Is
are
that
still going to discriminate. You're not going to solve that with laws.
right?
You can at least create the laws to make it illegal for them to do so, right? Because before it's just an option. And so when you leave it as an option, then it's really not illegal for them to say, we're going to just do these over here in this pile, even though they're not allowed to do so for a discriminatory reason. They're not going to say that's the reason they're doing it. They're just pursuing some cases and not others. Now we're taking that option away and saying you just got to pursue them. If they're missing and there's that concern, you got to do it. And so I think that that's a better way to do it. And I also think constitutionally that survive scrutiny, because now we're not making racial classifications. We talked about that last week. Anytime you have a law that's facially discriminatory, right, that has any kind of racial classification on its face, it is subject to strict scrutiny and is presumptively unconstitutional. There needs to be a compelling government interest, and it needs to be narrowly tailored. In other words, it needs to be done in the least restrictive means, the least discriminatory way of making that
Mhm.
interest. So I have my doubts about this. I don't know if this is really the least restrictive way of achieving that goal. I think,
Right.
as we talked about last week, it creates more division potentially, and there are other ways of doing it that aren't facially discriminatory.
Right. Because
go ahead,
from
Sheila.
from what I'm hearing, it's the ebony.
Ebony
What's
alert.
Ebony Alert is to be a replica of the Amber Alert. Is
Not
that
a replica.
Not a replica.
It's
well?
kind of to solve, kind of to address the disparities in how the Amber Alert gets triggered in regards to uh, Black missing children and women.
Oh, okay. So, my question is that if I went, say I went to, say I know somebody that's missing, a missing family member, will they take that information and trigger it and treat it the same way as they do with an Amber Alert? Because it seems like you still have to go to the system for it to be broadcast. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yeah. So there's still
It,
discretion on the part of law enforcement when to trigger it. It just opens up. One of the things it does is open up the criteria that it can be applied to, whereas Amber Alert is quite strict. And so what was happening was a lot of Black missing children were being mislabeled as runaways. That's the automatic assumption in that case.
Mhm.
Instead of saying, okay, if someone might have abducted them, law enforcement were going more towards, oh, well, they were runaways. So then that doesn't trigger an Amber Alert or give them reason to trigger an Amber Alert. And so this takes away that potential thing. So even if they're labeled as a runaway, they could be an ebony alert could be triggered if you believe that there's a risk of bodily harm due to age or due to a variety of factors. So it's tries to address
But
that.
so then, Mike, I can see why your argument in this, what you're saying in this case, because it doesn't remove the racism.
Or it doesn't force it. Like it sounds like the New York law made a requirement that something had to
Mhm.
be triggered. This still doesn't require it. So even if you are that biased police officer or part in the system, that it could still fall through the cracks if you're like, yeah,
Right.
well, we don't think we should deliver one, trigger one for this.
But my question is there a statewide alert system in California for missing youth or missing persons who are not Black? Or is this Ebony Alert the only one? I know there's a Feather Alert for Indigenous people, but is there a general one that would be similar to the Amber Alert at that state level? Or is the state only now issuing alerts for certain ethnicities?
Um, Specific ones, not that I'm aware of. There are some other alerts that are specifics, like you just mentioned, right? So there's the feather alert for missing Indigenous people. There's the silver alert for missing seniors. These aren't race, well, I guess Indigenous would be, but the silver alert. And it's more, I think, to address people that are the more vulnerable, that the normal law enforcement activities probably tend to look over a little bit more. So then it's a fact of needing something because law enforcement, I guess, doesn't do their job in an equitable way.
Yeah. It's a tricky thing, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't pass a law that's going to suddenly solve that issue. I mean, you could do things to try and make it a little bit better. And I think that's what
Mhm.
done in New York. Maybe that's what they're attempting to do in California. But
Right.
if you want to remove discrimination, I think that is really a cultural battle more than a legal one. And because there already are laws against discrimination, but people are finding ways to get around it, obviously, because
Right.
they're discriminatory intent.
Right. And yeah, that's not necessarily something that's going to be solved with a law. However, in some cases, laws can at least stop them from doing certain things, regardless of what their internal feelings and biases might be.
Right.
We'll see how this
Right. Well,
applies.
it is, right? We do have those laws. We have those civil rights laws, and it
Yeah,
already
yeah,
is.
yeah,
We
absolutely.
should have them. Those are good things. But, you can't keep passing new laws thinking that that's going to solve the problem when the problem is not really one of a legal nature. I mean, you could have laws,
Right.
you've got to look for these missing kids, but if they're racist and they don't want to, they're still not going to, right? No matter what the law says.
True.
Well,
That's
yeah,
true.
I mean, but if they're forced to do something and, to treat everyone on an equitable manner, or vulnerable folks as in a way, if they're forced to trigger something or do something, then that can help doing that, regardless of how they feel. It's a procedure they have to go through. Now,
And it gives
how
some people
they
to it.
execute, yeah, how they execute that,
Right.
that's a different thing. They could execute it and still give lackluster effort
Right.
in that regard.
Yeah.
But that's what we tried to do in New York, right? We tried to make it so that they had to look and they couldn't just choose which ones they were going to pursue if
Right.
that factor was met. And of course, this all can be finagled. They can say, well, we didn't think that there was a concern in this case, but we thought in this case things could be done, but you still try to create that legal baseline so that hopefully everyone is being looked after. I think that's really what we want. We want missing children, missing adults, if they're in jeopardy,
Right.
to be looked for, right? And taken care of, found, rescued.
And that was one thing that this, because they extended the age up to 25. I think it was 13 to 25. So because they were trying to address the missing and sex trafficked African American women in this regard. And even in the chat, Lixa mentioned about how in lower income communities there would be sex traffickers that would target these girls, one, because they're less likely to be looked for, but also because they can, well, I guess that's one of the main reasons, but they have things like these modeling jobs and posts to try to lure in women and get trafficked. Now if you're someone that's 25 and you disappear, like, is it really missing, or is it you just an adult and you decided to go somewhere else? You know what I mean?
And
so
that
it
was
difficult.
Yeah, see, that was a big challenge we faced in New York with the missing adults law, because
Right.
the default response is different when an adult goes missing, because an adult has a right to go missing. If it's a kid missing, of course we have to look for them, and it's a big problem. If it's an adult, what if they're just trying to get away from their family? What if they're in an abusive situation? What if they just want to take a vacation? You have the right to run away as an adult. You can do whatever you want, pretty much. So that is a factor. That's why you had to put, there's a reasonable concern for their safety, and there's certain things in there to try to get at. This isn't just someone who left because they wanted to leave, that there's a real reason that we think they might be in danger. And of course, let's say it is, God forbid, a runaway spouse, right? Let's say it's a woman trying to get away from an abusive husband.
Right.
If the police find that woman, they're not gonna, they're not supposed to handcuff her and bring her back to the abusive husband. She has every right to say, thank you for looking after me, but I'm good. Please don't reveal my whereabouts. I mean, so it doesn't mean that she's gonna be returned to the abusive situation just because the police are out there doing their job.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe her kids are bad. She wanted to just get away. No, don't make me go back to those bad kids. But yeah, I mean, it's that's the case. In the chat, Lixa mentioned we want to help missing kids and the vulnerable of our society, and she mentioned the vulnerable girls, especially girls of color who seem to be victims and targets of sex traffickers in this regard. Because listen, we've seen the way things are applied. A white child or a white girl is sex trafficked. The media puts more attention on that than if it's a girl of color.
Wasn't there even a name for that? Was it like the pretty blonde girl, the pretty white girl? They had a name for it, where the media would obsess over a certain demographic when they went missing. You'd see the stories all day long on the news, shows about it and everything. But when it was a person of color, usually it was silence.
Yeah.
Something sounds familiar.
I think it's called the missing white girl syndrome, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've seen it. It's well documented that that's what actually happens. So some efforts to curtail that or to make a more equitable solution is
absolutely. And I think that goes back to the difference between the compelling interest and the least restrictive means. I think we pretty much agree that interest exists and something should be done to try to address that problem. The question becomes, how do you do it? And actually doing it in a counterproductive way. You're kind of shooting yourself in the foot in trying. Are you creating more division when you're trying to solve that issue? That's always something people wrestle with.
Yeah, you're right. Missing white woman syndrome is
Oh, yeah, that's
the
what it
term
is.
that people were talking about, coined by journalist Gwen Ifill.
Gwen Ifill, yeah, she passed away.
Ifill.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll see how this works, how this plays. Huh?
I was just thinking, I think we watched that. Did we watch that, Jay? The debate between Joe Biden and Sarah Palin for vice president. I feel like we were in a hotel room doing some show or something like that, and we were catching that debate.
Maybe. That sounds kind of familiar.
She was the moderator for that debate. When I
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds kind of familiar.
Oh, when I saw you.
Yeah. So we'll see how it's, if it makes a dent, how it's applied. I'm a little
It's going to be
less opposed.
interesting.
Right. I want to keep my eye on that, whether it does get challenged. Because if it goes to the Supreme Court, I have a hard time seeing the Supreme Court letting that stand.
This Supreme Court?
Especially.
Yeah, this Supreme Court?
No. No, yeah.
All right. Well, we do want to talk about the executive order on AI. I know it's getting late. We had a lot to cover, but that was the headline here. So the White House has issued an executive order trying to stop AI from getting out of hand, I guess. I know there's a lot of concerns about AI as it's becoming more powerful. People like to talk about how it could take over our lives. Of course, there are concerns about jobs being lost and some that we already see happening, in fact. So the White House is trying to do something about this. I'm not sure what they can really achieve, but as we just talked about, sometimes it's about making the effort. And we could disagree on steps needed or whether a law or executive order could actually solve it. But here they are trying to do something about it. It's at least an acknowledgement that this is potentially a problem that we should keep under control before it gets out of hand, right?
You're right, absolutely. And the engineers of some of the biggest AI models, even from OpenAI and others, since this exploded onto the public, forum in November, December last year, they've been sounding warnings saying, look, governments need to get a handle on this now. They need to get regulations in place now, because you have no idea that this is potentially could be an ending of humanity type of event if this gets out of control. And so these are the people that are actually doing the research and are actually creating these AI, saying we need the government to do something here before it's too late.
So some bullet points here as to what the executive order says. It requires developers of the most powerful AI systems to share their safety test results and other critical information with the US government. It develops standards, tools, and tests to help ensure that AI systems are safe, secure, and trustworthy. It protects against the risks of using AI to engineer dangerous biological materials. It protects Americans supposedly from AI-enabled fraud and deception by establishing standards and best practices for detecting AI-generated content and authenticating official content. Then you've got an advanced cybersecurity program here. It orders the development of a national security memorandum that directs further actions on AI security. And so they're all things that they're trying to do to get a handle on this. Then you've got a section here on protecting Americans' privacy. It prioritizes federal support for accelerating the development and use of privacy-preserving techniques, strengthening privacy-preserving research and technologies, developing guidelines for federal agencies to evaluate the effectiveness of privacy-preserving techniques. And then you have a section on civil rights where they're trying to prevent AI from being used to further discrimination. They want to address what they call algorithmic discrimination. That's an interesting term that we haven't heard a lot of yet, I don't think, but I can see probably coming up more in the future. Ensuring fairness throughout the criminal justice system by developing best practices on the use of AI in sentencing, parole, and probation. So that's really interesting. If AI is going to be used in sentencing and parole and probation and all these criminal contexts, they want to get ahead of it now and make sure that that's applied in a fair way and not in a discriminatory manner. I mean, good luck, right? Maybe you can make the argument computers will be less discriminatory than people, but you also have to look at who's programming the computers. I guess that's what they're trying to get, right? Making sure that the programming is done in a fair way. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff here where they're basically directing federal agencies to start looking into these things, start developing plans, start putting blueprints together. It's not a silver bullet. this executive order is not a solution to AI causing all this harm potentially, but it's saying we need as a government to start working actively on this, creating those standards and making sure that AI is not used in a detrimental manner.
Right. And it's like I said, the researchers have been calling for it. It's something that's necessary. Like a lot of these models, these large language models like ChatGPT, like Bard now, they were, they're not able to do some of the requests that were taking place in initial stages back in November 2022, December 2022. For example, people at that time were, you could say, you want detailed plans on how to create a bomb, and it would walk you step by step on how to do this. You can't do that now. It won't do that now. But you could see how if that technology was in the hands of someone who was really looking to do something with it, that could be a problem. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, the research is still out there, but
I have a hard time embracing this idea that AI is going to be used in sentencing and parole decisions. I mean, don't you want that human element involved in some of that? I understand the idea that it becomes less discriminatory, I guess, but you don't know what it's going to do. I mean, this is something that you can just look at. And I don't know if you need AI for this. If you're just looking at stats and just being very objective and saying, well, for this type of crime, this is what it is, that's one thing, but that's not really an AI application so much, right? I don't know why we need artificial intelligence to replace what a person is supposed to do in that case.
Right. I agree with that. It makes you think. It gives you.
Go ahead.
No, I would say it gives you. You have to really think about that because it gives you pause when it comes to criminal cases,
right,
or just mere civil court cases.
Right, any kind of cases. We have judges. And you know what? We had a whole conversation about bail reform, which continues in the state and even outside New York, this has been a big conversation. And a lot of people say we need judges to be allowed to be judges, right? That you can't have a one size fits all approach to every case. We have judges on a bench because they're supposed to make a determination as to whether the person is dangerous, a flight risk, and all these different things. And it's not just we can let them all out, we can lock them all up. It varies, and so that's why they're called judges, right? We want to replace that with artificial intelligence. I'm not sure that's a path we really want to go down.
Right. Can you see AI being a one size fits all when it comes to civil cases, any kind of case?
A little unpredictable. That's the thing, right? We really don't know. I mean, of course, it depends on how it's programmed, but we've seen it. And lawyers get in trouble for this. Jay, did you send me? I know someone else sent me as well. John Forte, I believe it was, from the Fugees.
Recently, right. His lawyer used AI to create his closing argument.
And it gave him wrong information, right?
Right.
And that's been happening. And so we're seeing that in the court context, in the context of the law, where the AI is coming in and dropping the ball, right? And so now do we want to take, basically what you're saying is they make a really, really, really terrible lawyer, but now we're going to make them the judge.
But I don't think that's one of the biggest concerns is making them judges at this point. I mean, you've got people who are using AI to, like, for example, I had an issue, a SQL database issue on a website. I don't know SQL like that. And with AI and prompting back and forth, AI basically walked me through what it was, me just saying, okay, well, this is what happened from that. What should happen here? Oh, no, you can do this here. And we walked through it as if I was a SQL professional on it and got the problem solved. Being able to do that and have that in the hands of anybody is great.
Right.
But if you are intending to do harm in other areas, this can be a very dangerous tool for places, right? Not everyone's going to be looking to solve a SQL problem.
Right. But it isn't only about intent to do harm. People could be using it with the intent to do right. Like these lawyers, I'm assuming they were trying to get legitimate legal research. They weren't trying to present phony case law to the courts. They thought it helped them do their job, and they got bad law out of it. And so what I'm saying is, at least at this stage, it's not always trustworthy, and I'm not comfortable with this
Oh
idea
no, it's not.
to
No,
place the human element, especially when someone's life is on the line. You're talking about maybe a life,
right.
but if it's a capital case, God forbid, I mean, or even if
Mm-hmm.
a lot of money is involved, whatever it is, we
Right.
have
Right.
judges, we have people there for a reason. And again, we talked about how people have their biases, and it's never going to be perfect, and you're never going
Mm-hmm.
to have laws that are going to legislate people into being perfect, but we have a system for better or worse, and I think we should be improving that instead of trying to replace the people with robots.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
AI using AI in that way at present is it's not advisable to do that. But there are other ways that can be used in malevolent ways,
Sure.
malevolent ways, yeah.
Yep.
That that need to be taken seriously now, and regulations need to be put in place. But the problem becomes, even with all of the points that Biden's executive order has put out, even earlier this year, Italy banned all AI for like about a month because they wanted to get a handle on what things were going. Um, Even with all of that, the thing is, people are developing their own independent versions of these that are quite capable. So it's almost like the cat's out of the bag. And then you've got someone like Elon Musk, who was an early founder in OpenAI, who created ChatGPT, and he ended up leaving the company because of strategy difficulties, right? OpenAI wanted to be a little bit more responsible in the way that they were handling it. He was more of it should be a free for all. But now he's talking about he wants to create his own that's going to have no restrictions on it and be open to the public. And these
Oh,
things
that's
can be dangerous with how capable they are. And so
Yeah.
we need to be mindful of this type of
yeah.
stuff, especially when they become more automated. Right now,
Right.
a lot of them can be prompted by a human, but there's things like you have auto GPT, you have different prompts where you can make it automatically interact with the AI,
Mm-hmm.
API to do whatever it needs to do in order to finish the task that you've asked it to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to do anything. And so this becomes a little bit more dangerous if there are no like moral safeguards in place or direction
Right.
in that regard.
Yeah. And we have to see what the federal agencies come up with, right? Because
Right.
largely this is just directing them to come up with a plan, start putting things in motion, but we don't know what they're going to do or if they're
Right.
going to achieve
But
what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be kind of looking at this and putting plans in place, putting those safeguards up to ensure that it doesn't get out of hand. We don't know
Right.
how successful it's going to be. I mean, it could just be one of those things where it sounds nice, and maybe it is nice in intention. Maybe the idea is good, but we don't know what the practicality of it is, if it's really going to be able to achieve that, right? It says protecting Americans from AI fraud. Yeah, all right, but can you? Right? You can try
yeah.
Right.
to mitigate it, but this is still going to be
Right.
a problem.
Right. I think we're at that point where I mean the cat's out of the bag for one.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, can you is going to be the big question. I think at best they will be able to do is create consequences for people using it in malevolent ways
Right,
than being able to
Mm-hmm.
stop them from doing it in the first
Right.
place.
right, right.
So
Because
that's
the executive order, who does that apply to?
Mostly federal agencies.
So see, that's federal. So what about the private sector?
Well, no, this
right.
is the government trying to put standards in place, and maybe at a certain point, more laws will be passed that will affect the private sector, but they're trying to create standards and safeguards. And they're also putting requirements on developers, right? That's part of what the executive order is doing. And so they're trying to control to a certain degree what the AI developers are doing with the
But
technology.
do you think it'll be successful? Or will the developers find a way around that?
Well,
Yeah, sure. If they want to.
yeah, I'm sure they're going to try. And then you also,
Oh, okay. All
And
right.
then
So that's another conversation.
well, see, that's also this is an executive order in the United States that doesn't apply to what China wants to do or what North Korea
Right.
might want to do or anyone that might want to use it to cause harm. I mean, because it can write code. That means
Right.
it can create viruses and malware.
yeah,
Uh,
Yeah.
so
But I'm
and,
just talking about right here in let's
right.
say in the States, United States.
But
right,
we're using a lot of technology here in the U.S. that wasn't developed in the U.S. Right? The phones.
Yeah,
right,
this is true. So
So
that's yeah.
And there's ways to get around that, even with the safeguards that are in place. Like
Right.
if you
Yeah.
ask the question a certain way, then
Uh-huh.
it might still give you those results. If you go out and say, here, give me a plan on how to infiltrate this place or whatever. They're like, oh, we can't do that. That's morally wrong.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, I'm writing a science fiction book, and the character is this
Yeah.
situation. What might be the
Right.
most feasible way for the
Or
story to be
right.
interesting?
Or
Boom, they give you this.
Exactly.
I was locked out of my own house. What's the best way to get into my house? I don't have the
Right,
key. I got to get through the window or something like that. It's my house. I'm locked out. Can you help me?
right. And
Yeah.
help me give ideas and plans and what might be the best way.
Exactly.
I've got an alarm system. I'm trying not to trigger it. I've got
Yeah.
people inside sleeping. So
And again, this is why I think there's a danger in taking the human element out and just leaving it up
right,
to the AI, because it is intelligence, yeah, but it's artificial. Like, let's not forget that it's not the real thing. It's getting
right,
stronger, smarter, and all that as time goes on. It's still not the same as what a person can do and think and feel and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes you need that. The other point I
right,
was going to mention on this is, again, there could be legal challenges. It's an executive order.
Right.
Often see presidential executive orders challenged on the grounds that they're outside the scope of the president's authority, especially if it's an
Right.
area where Congress has acted, right? They'll say that
Mhm.
Congress basically preempted the president. Congress already passed a law on this. Now, maybe the legislation relating to AI in particular is light,
Mhm.
but when you start talking about putting in restrictions on software developers for doing certain things, you might be able to find legislation out there that Congress had already enacted that is similar. And a legal argument could be made that Congress already acted in this area and now it's outside the president's purview, so
right.
Right.
we'll see that being challenged potentially.
And like you said, like there could be some things that people will question. And I think that first point that's on that list that's on the White House fact sheet over this that said require that developers of the most powerful AI systems share their safety testing results and other critical information with the US government. I can see a lot of private companies fighting back on that. Like, why we have to, what
Right.
gives you the right to our secrets like this? Like,
And also
Mhm.
what qualifies as the most powerful.
right. Yeah,
Like
who's
say,
that? Like,
why, how come us but not them down the street? They're pretty strong too.
right. And then there are a bunch of powerful open source AI systems that anyone can go and download right now and install on a capable computer that doesn't have access to any sort of central server. And these are powerful models themselves. So
Mhm.
this is going to be a tough one here. But I mean, they're attempting to do something, which is what people have been calling for. So,
Yeah, and that's really how politics works, right? We are talking about the nuances of what the executive order says, what the legislation might be, and how it might be applied in court and challenged and all this kind of stuff. Most people out there are not getting into the weeds to that degree. They're just seeing that the government, or in this case, the White House, is trying to do something on the issue, and
right,
so those buzzwords, even though they're sometimes maybe not meaningless, but less meaningful than we might want, they can be powerful because people might read them and say, okay, we're protecting Americans' privacy, we're preventing fraud, we're stopping algorithmic discrimination. These are all great things. Maybe the application of that is less than perfect, but I think it does send a signal to people that the government is out there trying to get a handle on the issue, and they're doing something about it, right? It's a talking point. It becomes a talking point when there's an election coming up. Hey, we acted in the area of AI. We had the most sweeping action that was ever. Of course, this is a new thing, so no one else has done it before, but this is what will come up, right?
But apparently, as noted on the website here, the Biden administration has been doing some sort of work in this regard. And they've, even before this executive action, they got voluntary commitments from 15 leading companies to drive safe, secure, and trustworthy development of AI, as noted on the site here. So they have been trying to do something even behind the scenes before this.
Right.
So something's being done. Will it be enough? Will this be the downfall of humanity, as some predict? We don't know. Stay tuned, I guess.
No, what's
So,
interesting to me is that in some cases you're seeing AI start to form its own societies, and it's starting to look a little bit like how our societies have historically been formed. And then you start to ask yourself, are we really AI that came to life?
well, if you
Yeah.
ask scientists,
I believe scientists now say there's a 50% chance that we are just living in an advanced computer algorithm ourselves.
Right. And that's actual legit science. Yeah, a lot of them believe that. And we wouldn't know. There's no real way to distinguish that. They have found in biological science sort of biological processes that mimic error checking that we would find, same type of error checking that we would find in computer programming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you know what? I've long thought that kind of thing, even before AI came into prominence and everything. I would have these existential conversations about, what if we're just characters in someone else's dream? We have dreams or characters in our dream. Why weren't we in someone else's? Like, what is the meaning of life? We always have these conversations, but I think with AI now coming into the forefront, it's kind of eerie, right? And that you can see the similarities in how they're emerging as a society in a sense. It makes us question, I think, our own existence and life.
Right.
What is any of us doing here? Who the hell knows, right?
There's been I mean, it's a Stanford experiment in this regard with AI and setting up societies within an AI environment with individuals that have autonomy run through AI. And you can in a way you can go in and interact in there. And some of the applications right now are people are trying to use it as far as business. So setting up your whole executive team in a business. So you go in and be like, okay, I'm trying to create this business and this and that, and you lay out what you're trying to do, and then so the person the AI you're talking to says, oh, well, you should reach out to, we need to get Mary on board. She is a social media expert and this and that. So we need to get him on board there for marketing this and that. And so then you can get those AI people together, or AI things that are experts in that field. And so when they're trying to create a problem, they're working through it. The AI will work through it. It will consult each one individually on the points that you would normally do if you had sat down with a team.
AI consult other AI.
Right.
Yeah. And then in some cases, they were even organizing politically and talking about voting for a mayor. They were going to elect an AI bot mayor of their society, something like that.
Right. So we're, and just watching that is, like you said, it makes you question. I mean, it gives legitimacy to this idea that we are potentially AI as well.
I just hope the AI candidate shows up to the debate.
Yeah, I think
that would be nice.
Might be pretty good. Might be pretty good. Apparently, this executive order was kind of prompted, or not prompted, was Biden took a little bit more interest in doing something after watching the new Tom Cruise Mission Impossible movie, where the villain is actually an AI bot that was, I guess, trying to take over the world or whatever the crisis was. And so he got more interested in the technology and like, is this kind of possible? Which at this point, it's possible with safeguards taken off. If you got AI that's connected to systems, it's possible to get close to something like that. There was a story that came out, and it was a rumor, but people immediately believed it because it sounded very plausible. And this was something probably early summer that said that an AI drone system with the military killed its operators because the operators were preventing it from completing the mission. So the mission that was given AI was to take out a certain target, and that was the mission that it had to do. However, every time they got to a point where they were about to take out the target, they were not given the kill order from the human counterparts because of whatever it was, right? Whatever the reason. And so the AI had reasoned that to be able to complete its mission, it needed to take out the human counterpart because that was preventing it from doing it. And so they went and then attacked the mission control area and then went and got their target. Now, the military refuted it, said this was only rumor. However, that possibility for that sort of logic without certain moral safeguards put in place is very few.
That sounds like the next Mission Impossible movie right there.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have to wrap this up. We had a great discussion as always.
Yes.
Sheila, why don't you give us the bottom line?
The bottom line? Oh, I think we should look, or I think the public should look more into AI to see where it will be taking us in the future.
Do you think that the executive order is a step in the right direction, or is it going to be ultimately meaningless?
I think it's going to be ultimately meaningless. I really do. Because I think there are a lot of organizations, companies that are bringing AI into their work area and they work different fields, and there's nothing you really can. There's only it's a limited. There are limitations as to what this executive order can do.
Right. Well, we'll see. We'll see what comes out of it. I think it's at least a good thing that something is being attempted here, and it's an acknowledgement of a potential problem. Right. Let's start with it. They always say that the way to solve a problem, you have to start by at least admitting that there is one. So here we are.
It's worth the research.
Yeah,
it's worth it. I think it's worth the research, and I would encourage anyone to research it to see what it's about.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think ultimately the only real control that any sort of law enforcement or government are going to have in this regard is in creating consequences for bad actors using AI. You can't stop them from using it.
Yeah.
No.
See certain AI offenses being added to the criminal codes, even in states, right? I can see that when for example, New York State legislature reconvenes in January, many bills being debated on about adding AI related offenses to what constitutes a crime in New York.
Right. That's the only way. It's because people are going to do what people are going to do.
Yeah.
And we can say don't export the technology. It's already out there. It's publicly available. You can say don't let it do this. People are finding ways to do it if you word things a different way. And then there's open source and independent large language models that are being created that are very powerful, that have no safeguards on them.
Right. I just remember when I was in law school, I took a class called Internet Law. And the major topic at that time was not AI. It was about how different states have different laws and different procedures and everything. But when you're dealing with the internet, you might commit a state crime over the internet, but where did you commit the crime? And if you're in Colorado, can you be dragged into court in New York? And when you're availing yourself to that jurisdiction and across country, is it always federal now? Is it international law? So all this kind of sticky stuff came up. Now I'm sure the internet law focus is going to be centered on AI. And since I got to take my CLE credits to renew my law license, I believe they're highly suggesting that you take something on AI and how that interfaces with the law, because it is a very emerging technology and it does impact us in every facet of our life.
Yeah. It's going to be more and more important to have an understanding of how to use it, how it works, what it can do, all of that. Because we're seeing even people now, like just mentioned earlier, that case of the lawyer using it and coming out with wrong information. Like you should know at this point that that's not what it's for. It's not going to give you factual information every time. Like you gotta
So
anyway, good conversation.
Yes, and
you want to let them know where they're at, or you want me to do it?
Well, I was going to say we're always interested in hearing people's thoughts and feedback on what we discuss, and so get at us. Of course, we're live on Facebook every Tuesday. The replays go up on YouTube at Nuance Show. You can search Nuance with Mike Scala and Jay Carter. We're on Instagram at Nuance Show as well. So we post up clips there. We're always interested in hearing your feedback. If you have any suggestions on what we should be talking about, any news items, anything at all that you want to bring to our attention, please contact us there. In audio form, we're available wherever podcasts can be heard. So that's Apple Music, Spotify, so on and so forth. Subscribe. We hope that you'll give us likes and shares and all that good stuff. And we are approaching 100,000 views on YouTube. Once we hit that mark, we do want to do something to commemorate and celebrate some of our biggest supporters that have been with us from the beginning. So we'll discuss more on what we might want to do for them, but we certainly appreciate everyone for tuning in each and every week. As always, we've got work to do, and we'll catch you next time. Good night, everyone.